Good afternoon, everyone. Having reached the hour of 2 o'clock Eastern Time, we'll go ahead and get started with this afternoon's webinar on responsible ag. I'd like to thank each of you for joining. We have a great turnout today, and I think we have a really good program for you about this enterprise joint venture of ARA and the Fertilizer Institute. I'm also bringing greetings from my colleague, Corey Rosenbush. He is on the road today and unable to join us, but this has very much from almost the beginning been a joint effort of ARA and TFI, and it's totally a 50-50 partnership between the two of us today. And so he's here in spirit, even if he's not here in person. This Responsible Ag program started actually just before the West Fertilizer incident. So it wasn't totally a response to West Fertilizer. Around the ARA board table in February of that year, we had talked about doing a fertilizer code of practice that would apply to anhydrous ammonia handling. And so as we got that kind of started, and then West Fertilizer happened, and so we immediately changed in two ways. We went to TFI because we knew this needed to be an across the industry kind of an effort, and teamed up with them. We also expanded the scope, so it wouldn't just deal with anhydrous ammonia, but initially would include ammonium nitrate, and then gradually has expanded to a much larger scope today. And it led us to the ASMARC Institute as the right organization to be the people that put the program together and manage it for us. And so it's been a good partnership with them all the way along as well. As of yesterday, we have 2,300 in round numbers retail sites participating in the program, and 1,272 of those have actually received their certification, which means that they've had an audit, they've received their list of corrective actions, they've fixed those problems, and now they're certified. And perhaps more impressive is that the program has fixed over 90,000 issues that could have been something that would be a regulatory citation, potentially a fine. And so we're improving safety, but we're also saving retailers money with this program. So to explain how this program works for retailers, we've got two industry experts on the line. I'm happy to introduce them. Brian Miller is the president of Miller Risk Management. He plays two key roles with Responsible Ag. He's the lead instructor for our auditor certification training course, and he also does verifications to ensure that the consistency of the audits is good from one auditor to another, one location to another. Billy Perkle is vice president of corporate services for Novus Ag. He was a founding member of the Responsible Ag Board of Directors. He's a past ARA board chairman, and he now chairs the Responsible Ag Technical Committee. So two very knowledgeable people today, and I'm going to turn the program over to Billy Perkle. And Billy, it's all yours.
Thank you, Darren. It's great to join everyone today. I'm going to just start off with a little bit of background, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we structured Responsible Ag, how it operates a little bit. Some people may have a few questions around the structure and how an organization like Responsible Ag sort of works. Before I get started with that, I did want to take a moment. Darren mentioned West Texas, and my next slide is really a plaque that is at the Ford West Training Center, and it's the honor or to remember the lives that were lost in the tragic explosion at West Texas. If you ever get to visit the facility, you'll see this plaque and the names and the families that were impacted by that tragic explosion. While Darren mentioned that West Texas didn't initiate Responsible Ag, the industry had already begun some stewardship efforts. It was probably a gelling moment that, as Darren mentioned, that TFI and ARA came together, as well as several state and industry members to start the founding of Responsible Ag. And on the next slide, I actually will share with you a little bit about a timeline so you can sort of see that there were stewardship efforts that began as early as 2011 when ASMARC started off with an ammonia technician school. The industry was identifying the need for additional tools to help ag retailers comply with the regulatory risks that we have and use responsibly within our industry. One item on this timeline I will mention: after West Texas, there was an executive order issued by President Obama. It's referenced here as Executive Order 13650, and some of the things that you'll look in that executive order and see, some of the things was, one issue that was identified in West Texas is that the regulatory agencies did not work well or communicate well with each other. I think it's sort of something to look back upon, because I think even though we didn't have an executive order to tell the industry to work together, they were already doing that. And so compliments to TFI, compliments to Darren and ARA, and very many industry members who came together and put together the actual foundation of responsible ag. Also, I'll talk a little bit about the initial board and a little bit about the Ford West Training Center. So on the next slide, you'll actually see the actual initial board, I believe is the next slide. These are the initial board members that was a part of the initial board of Responsible Ag. And you can see several industries that were actually participating and donating time and talent to those. I'd just take a moment to recognize some of those people who were some of the first board members, as well as Darren and ARA and Chris with TFI at the time. And so if you see these people in the industry, bump into them, say thank you for their contribution to the initial start. So the next slide is a picture of the Ford West Training Center. This was an ag retail site that actually got converted over into the training center. Those efforts to turn it into a world-class facility are much due to a gentleman named Alan Summers, who took that upon a task upon his own self. And if you ever get a chance to visit the site, you'll see when we say we will refer to it as a world-class training center, it's one of a kind. And so it's a great facility. The next slide, I wanted to share with you how the Responsible Ag sort of operates. There are members who actually join Responsible Ag and become a participant, go through the audit and enroll and go through or participate and make corrective actions. But there's a board of directors that we just there's an executive director. That executive director role, as Darren mentioned, is sort of being performed by ASMARC, and I'll talk a little bit more about what they do as well. Then there's two committees. There's a technical committee, which I get to serve on, which is great. And then there's a communication committee. And the technical committee, that is made up of industry members as well as the communications. But let me talk a little bit about the board. The board, the next slide shows the current board members, and you can see those. Again, you can see it's a cross variety of many people in the industry. And highlight some people. You may have read about Tim McCardle at Brant Consolidated. Sad to congratulate him with his retirement that just was announced, but he's still active in the industry and still leads the current board. But the board really is to oversee and make sure that the Responsible Ag program is still moving forward. They look over the financial aspect of it to make sure. They also respond to industry inquiries if there were some concerns about the industry, about how it was working. And so they actually are the voice and the direction for Responsible Ag. The other things that I think the board does is they sort of wear the duty and the responsibilities to make sure the organization continues. And they've put together quite a bit of succession planning. As you see, people maybe move on the board and then new members come on. but they actually they create a sustaining succession for the organization. The other things that they do, as I mentioned, they give credence and credibility to each one of the members. So many of the people, even when I served on the board, people would call me and say, Billy, explain this, tell me about this. So these board members become advocates for responsible ag. The next slide I have is the technical committee, and I'll talk a little bit about the technical committee. The technical committee has the role or the duties to review emerging regulations that may be coming, that we're made aware of that are coming up. And then as we review the emerging regs that may come up, they will review the regulation, propose audit items so that we can add that and update and keep the audit refreshed. As well as occasionally, sometimes some of the audit questions are vague or not real clear. And so we'll revisit those and revisit the original regulation and try to give clarity so that the audit protocols actually function very well. Occasionally, we even get asked to respond to training information. So if you're a part of Responsible Ag, you'll know that there actually is quite a bit of a reference library or compliance guidelines. And so the technical committee will review and update compliant guidelines to make sure that they stay fresh and clear, and then also address new emerging regulations. And that's a part of the reason we're having the call today is there are comments by many of the agencies that for the past 4 years of administration, not much regulation was made on our industry. However, I think that may be changing with the change of administration. And so this technical committee is trying to stay abreast, working with TFI and ARA as new regulations come forth. And then once they review those, they will draft audit protocols with suggested corrective actions and get training guidelines or compliance guidelines as well. So if you bump into any of these people in the industry, say hello and thank you for their service. It is a voluntary service, so they do this in addition to their day job. And there's a great group of people that actually donate their time to make Responsible Ag successful. And I think that was I may have one slide here that shows a little bit about Responsible Ag, the website. And this website wouldn't have happened without ASMARC. So ASMARC actually is sort of the backbone behind I call them the IT group. They may not like for me to refer to ASMARC as the IT, but they're great. Their technical abilities has made us successful. So they actually do the data management section. So if you enroll, all the enrollment process, this website, all the reports and the follow-ups that come, ASMARC administers all of those. So they've been a great partner with us. We would not have been as successful without their support. One of the things about the website, I'd encourage you to visit if you have not, but if you hover over each one of those tiles, they will actually rotate, and behind them you'll see some drop-down menus, and you can visit those. I would encourage you to view some of those. In the upper right there, you can see a video overview of it, and that's a great sort of soundbite about it. You can also see other people. You can learn how to join Responsible Ag from this website. You can also, if you'd like to become an auditor, whether it's an internal auditor or a contracted or external auditor, there's information on that. And then also about how to register your facility if you're an ag retailer. So again, I can't brag on ASMARC enough with their contribution that they've given and their leadership and guidance with technology to help us stand this up. Many of you may be aware of responsible care or responsible distribution, which are similar programs with within our industry, specifically with the manufacturing distributions of chemicals. Some of the participants that also participate in those programs, responsible care or responsible distribution, have reviewed our program and complimented the sophistication and how quick this website was developed and all the tools and resources that are available to the participants. That energy and effort would not have been totally successful without ASMARC. So again, a shout out to ASMARC and what they've contributed to help us be successful. The next slide, and now I would like to turn it over to Brian Miller, and Brian is an auditor himself and a trainer in an industry. I think, Brian, you've been in the industry for about 30 something years. I'm not sure exact. I won't do that to give away your age, but I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Billy. Yes, it's been 40 years. I've been in this business, more than that if you count the time I worked in this business in college, but that just means I'm old. Billy gave me a perfect segue when he was talking about the website. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about how Responsible Ag works, some of the nuances. He mentioned registration. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that. And then at the end of my presentation, we're going to get into the benefits, why you would want to join Responsible Ag if you're not a part of it. And there are a number of reasons. So we'll go through those toward the end. So let's start with the website. And Billy put the screenshot up there. I'm going to put a couple of screenshots up here from the website. So let's start with the main www.responsibleag.org. That is the website that you would go to. Simply type it into your address bar. It'll take you to this screen here. And then once you get to this screen, now Billy showed the entire front page when you scroll down. I've got it as you get one screenshot and then you scroll down and you can see on the next slide where you would find the button to register. So you're going to go down and you'll see register today. It's very clearly identified. I've put a red circle around it so you can see it for the purposes of this presentation, but it's extremely easy. And you just go to this button and you click on it, and you're going to come to a screen that basically tells you a little bit more about how to register, okay? So you're going to get a tree that looks like this for registration, and it's going to ask you what type of facility you have. And you can see the manufacturer, producer, importer, distributor, and so forth. For this presentation, we're going to focus mostly on retailers. So we will talk a little bit about satellites. So if you click on retailers and you saw down there underneath retailer, there was a thing that says, well, if I'm not quite sure whether I'm a retailer or whether I'm maybe a distributor, or maybe my site's a satellite, if you click on definition down there in that tree, you'll get a box that looks just like this. And in this case, it's defining what is considered a retailer. And most of us would know what that is, but it spells it out for you. And then you would know what to do. And it goes into the registration fee as well. Now, once you register, it's going to ask you some basic information. I mean, really basic stuff, like the name of your facility, a little bit about the contact information, the address, the scope of your operations, phone number. I mean, just really kind of basic information. And then once you do that registration, ASMARC will send you a user ID and a password. So that's how you're going to get into the information related specific to your site. It's also how you're going to be able to get into these resources that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. So if you go back to the website after you've registered and you go back to the main website, in the upper right-hand corner, there is a menu option for participants, okay? So you can see it on this screen. I've got it circled there. Once you get your user ID and password, you click on participants, and then it's going to take you to the next slide, and it's going to give you the opportunity to sign in. So it's going to say facility login. You see again, I've got it circled in red, tells you exactly where you're going to sign in. You can also see right up above that, the auditor login. We'll talk about the auditor training in here just a little bit. But in the case of the auditors, once they do the training and they have everything in place, they're going to click into auditor login. Of course, you see the other logins there, but if you're a facility, you're going to go to facility login, and then you're going to be able to access your information, okay? Now, once you get to this point, all the other things that I'm going to show you are protected but against the public. In other words, you have to have a user ID and a password to get in there. So I wanted to go over just a little bit about how you would select an auditor. So you've registered with the site, you've become a part of Responsible Ag, you now have your user ID and password, and you can log in. You're gonna be able to, on the next screen, come to a screen that allows you to select your auditor. Now you'll see it in this next slide in the upper left-hand corner where it says select auditor. And again, I've circled it in red for the purposes of this presentation to give you the opportunity that if you want to select George Clooney down there and the third one down, you can do that, but you have to you yourself select who you want to be your auditor, okay? Now, let's say, for example, we wanted to pick the very first gentleman up there at the top, and you'll see that he's John D. Auditor. If you clicked on his information over here where it says auditor info, you'd get a screen like the next slide. Now, the next slide is going to tell you some things about that auditor. It's going to tell you things like how many years experience does he have. It's going to tell you things like, is he an internal auditor or is he a contract auditor? Because it is possible to be both. You could be an internal auditor and you could be a contract auditor, or you could be either or. Many companies have internal auditors, and Responsible Ag is fine with that as long as they go through the training and become credentialed. And so if in fact that's the guy you want, then you'll go over there to the right side where it says select auditor. You'll select him. You'll get a screen that says, well, are you really sure you want to select this guy? And you'll have an opportunity to say yes or no. Once you click yes, then that auditor will get an email and say that they've been selected by your site, and they will then make arrangements to get you coordinated in terms of when the audit's going to be a little bit. He's going to ask you a lot of questions so he knows what to expect about your site, like the scope of operations. Do you have dry fertilizer, liquid fertilizer, anhydrous ammonia, ammonium nitrate? Any of those things are going to be important to him as he prepares for the audit. So you've selected the auditor, and on the site, we've given you the menu of people that you can choose from. Keep in mind that if they're on this menu of people to choose from, that means that they've been through the auditor training and they have become credentialed. They have background check, insurance, and all that has been set up. So you know that that guy is eligible to become your auditor. So let's talk just a little bit about the auditors and some of the things that they go through. Now, Billy mentioned, and he did a really good job of talking about the training facility that we have. As far as we know, this auditor training is done at the only former retail ag facility in the country that is for training purposes, okay? We do OSHA training there for retail ag facilities, and we do the auditor training. And there's some fairly tight restrictions on who can be an auditor. They have to have a certain level of experience before they can even enroll in the course. And we go through 4 days of training. Now, the first half day, we talk a lot about the nuances of training and some of the details and some of the things that they need to do as far as setting it up, the initial meeting, the initial contact. And then we spend 2.5 days of that 4 days actually auditing. And because we have an actual retail facility there, we can actually go out and audit just like we would at one of your sites. So for example, if we wanted to go out to the bulk chemical area and we wanted to look at the chemical pumps, we could see that there's a pump shaft that's not properly guarded. We can point directly to it We can say why it's not proper. We can say what needs to be done. And so that the auditors all know and all see it from a consistent basis. And in this case, it's an OSHA issue. So they know what OSHA expects and what the requirement is. This has been extremely valuable. During the auditor training, we try sometimes to bring up things that are a little bit unusual. Maybe the auditor may not likely come across it, but they could. And so we want them to be prepared for what could be coming in the case of them out doing audits themselves. So the site must get, I should say the auditor must get an 80% score to be able to become an auditor. And we track it through the entire week. We keep track of quiz scores, we keep track of audit scores. There's a final exam at the end. It's a fairly rigorous type of training because we want to ensure that the auditors are doing the type of work that Responsible Ag wants from a consistency standpoint and accuracy standpoint. And so those that have been through it will tell you that it's a fairly grueling week, but they will also tell you that it was an enjoyable week because we can have that hands-on experience with teaching them what they need to look for. So after the training is completed, they're going to submit an application. And again, they're going to go on the website just a little bit like we showed you, and they're going to be able to apply. They'll have to tell whether they're going to be an internal auditor or a contract auditor, because in the case of contract auditors, they have to supply insurance information. And if you're within the same company and you have internal auditors, that's fine, as long as they've gone through the process. You'll go in and select them just like you did if it's a contract auditor, okay? All audits, and it's roughly 7% of all audits, will get a verification audit. And as Darren told you at the beginning, I do those. And what we look at on the verification audit is not so much the site itself, it's more about the auditor. And I ask the site questions a lot about the auditor himself as to how he conducted himself, how the day went, what they thought. And that gives us another way to ensure that we're being consistent in the way that we're doing these audits and in the way that we're getting a good work product for the people that are in the Responsible Ag program. Okay, so I want to now show you a corrective action plan. So the auditor's been there, he's done your audit, he'll enter it into the system. I want to show you what you're going to get now. You're going to get a corrective action plan. And the corrective action plan is based on the things that he found wrong, he or she found wrong when they were doing the audit. The things that they marked as being right, or the things that they marked as being not applicable, are not going to show up on this corrective action plan. And you will see on the corrective action plan when you get it that it'll tell you what the question number is for the issue. And I'll show you the Responsible Ag checklist here in just a minute. So you'll have a direct correlation to the question. It'll say what action is needed. It'll say what the deadline is, and the deadlines are predetermined by the technical committee based on the amount of time and effort it may take to get the corrective actions completed. There's a column there for who corrected it, and that way there's a way to track. And I'm sorry, the date for the correction, that's the corrected, is the date that you corrected it, and then the last column is who did it, the resolved by. I want you to note there under question A20, you'll see something that says auditor notes. So the auditor has the ability, when he marks something no, he clicks a little pencil in the checklist and he can type in something about that particular issue. And that helps the site know what it is they need to correct. So for example, we had a tire that had it was bad tire on anhydrous ammonia number 52, okay? Well, if he didn't put in there, it's the tire on tank number 52, you may have 75 ammonia tanks, and if he doesn't put that note in there, or maybe you weren't with him or made a note when he told you that, then you get the corrective action plan to go, oh gee, well, which tire is it and which tank? So by doing this on the auditor notes, the auditor can explain to you when you get your corrective action plan exactly which tank has a bad tire, therefore you know exactly what to do. So the auditor notes are very important in certain situations, so we talk about that when we're doing the auditor training as well. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the resources that are available on the Responsible Ag website, because there are a lot of resources here that I want to make sure you know about, and I'm not going to be able to go over all of them for the simple fact that we just don't have enough time to go over all of them. But I want you to know some of the basic things that are in the Responsible Ag checklist. And again, all the stuff that I'm going to show you is password protected after you become a part of Responsible Ag. So the first thing I'm going to show you is basically the checklist. This is like an open book test. There's no secrets. You will have a copy of the checklist in hard copy. You will also have a copy of it accessible to you by the website. So you would click right here where it says Responsible Ag Audit, download now if you want an electronic copy. I've circled it in red here. And then you're going to see the actual checklist. Now, we've just taken a portion of one page for this presentation, but you're going to be able to see on the checklist where it talks about, in this case, it's EH&S documentation that we're going to show you from this page. It shows you all the questions here. It also has in the upper right-hand corner a place where you can see the actual CFR regulation, where this is coming from, a little bit about the requirement for that particular question. And so again, this is like an open book test, okay? Now, after you've got a copy of the checklist, there's another document that references the EH&S checklist. And if we could advance the slides here, that would be great. So let's talk about the auditor guidance. And the screen that's up there now, you'll see that Responsible Ag Audit is circled. Right below it, you're going to see something that says Responsible Ag Auditor Guidance. And in the guidance, it basically gives you a description of what each of the questions are. So for example, you'll see confined space entry program there is question A140. If you wanted to know a little bit more about it, you could click on, next slide please. You could click on the Responsible Ag Auditor Guidance, and then it's going to show you more details about that question A140 on confined space entry program in regard to what's required for that, okay? Okay, next slide, please. So it will tell you a little bit more detail as to what. So if you're one of those guys and you look at the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, or you look at something here and you're lost as an Easter egg and you don't have any clue as to what you need to do, you can go to this auditor guidance. For every question, there's an auditor guidance, and it will give you the details as to what you need to do, okay? Now, the next tool I want to show you is called Easy Search. And again, it's on the same places where you saw the Responsible Ag Audit, where we had it circled on the opposite side, right? You'll see something that says Easy Search. And if you click on that, you're going to come up with this screen right here that you're seeing. So let's say in this example, we want to know something about fire extinguishers. Well, we can do it one of three ways. If you know the actual question related to the fire extinguisher, you can type that in up at the top. Or if you know the citation for the fire extinguisher, which happens to be 1910-157, but who knows that off the top of their head, right? Hardly anybody does. You're probably not going to know the question number off the top of your head. So most people are going to find the information they're looking for in this section by just typing in the words fire extinguisher. When you do that, you hit the search button on the right side of that, and boom, all of the questions related to fire extinguishers come right up. It tells you what the requirement is, and it tells you what you need to do. So again, another tool in the toolbox that comes with being a part of Responsible Ag that helps people get to where they need to be and helps them understand what the requirement is. Now, I'm going to show you maybe the best for last, and this is probably the most used part of the Responsible Ag resources and the tools in the toolbox, and that's the Compliance Assistance Library. And Billy made a little bit of a reference to it when he was talking about it. So let me show you where that is. Next slide, please. And right under the Easy Search button, you're going to see something that says Compliance Assistance Library. And it's extremely simple. You simply click on that Compliance Assistance Library button. And when you do that, it will come up to a menu, okay? Next slide, please. So when we get to this menu, you're going to see a list of every subject matter that's covered in the Responsible Ag checklist. Every question related to a certain subject is going to be listed on the Compliance Assistance Library. And once you find which one you're looking for there, you're going to check that. And it's going to take you, okay, there's the screen with showing you where to click. Okay, go ahead, next slide. And here's where you're going to choose what it is that you're looking for. In my example, you'll see I've got confined space circled. So in this case, I'm looking for more information on confined space. If I click on it, it's going to come up to this page that you see now. Now, first of all, you'll notice that the actual Code of Federal Regulation is listed there as a link. You'll see it's 29 CFR 1910-1446. So if I wanted to go to the actual regulation, I could do that. However, I would recommend that you go to this document first because it lays it out in very simple terms. There's no legalese to it. There's no trying to decipher what is the intent. It's very much in layman's terms. It's easy to follow. There's a place in the case of confined space here. This document will have an introduction. It'll have a definition section for the entrant, the attendant, the supervisor, all of those. It'll have information about the permits. It'll have information about the written program, about the training. All of it is right here in this document. A very valuable piece of information, but let's take a listen to some of the people that have used it. Let's get some testimonies and some quotes from people who have actually used this document and let them tell you how they feel about this document. Okay, next slide, please. So the first one we're going to have is Tom Winning, and he's with Premier Ag in Indiana. He says it summarizes regulations in layman's terms, so it's easy to understand, concise, and it can be printed out as handouts if you need it. Next slide, please. Another testimony for it is Alicia Wagner-Brown from CHS. She says if she marks it needs corrective actions, she'll often hear people say, well, what's that mean? What do I need to do? Well, the Responsible Ag Compliance Assistance Library basically helps them find the rules and find the corrective action that's needed, okay? All right, now, we've talked about some of the nuances with Responsible Ag, some of the resources. There are more that I just didn't have time to be able to go through. I want to talk now about the benefits of Responsible Ag. In other words, why would you want to be a part of Responsible Ag? And again, there's a number of reasons. I had to kind of trim it down a little bit to make sure that we get through everything. So let's take a look at the benefits of Responsible Ag. And I have 6 of them listed here on the next screen. And what we're looking for here in regard to Responsible Ag and in regard to being a part of it, some of the benefits would be such things as a culture. Identifying yourself with the proper safety culture, and I'll talk every single one of these. I'm going to go into more detail. So let's talk a little bit about the culture first. So the safety culture is something that is something you can't put a price on, okay? So let's talk about the culture. By definition, the safety culture is the attitude, the beliefs, perceptions, and the values that employees share in relation to workplace safety, okay? And in order for this to be successful, it has to be all the way from the top of the company all the way down to the operations folks, the guys that are out doing the actual work. It has to be all the way through. And you know this old saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Safety culture is certainly one of those things. Next slide, please. And in order for workers to recognize the value of a safety culture, it has to be something that's constant reinforcement from all people. Everybody holds each other accountable. It involves leadership and management to push that it's important to them, therefore it becomes important to all the workers. And basically what we're talking about here is we're talking about things where you approach a task and you simply take a couple of seconds to look around and say, well, what could happen here? What precautions do we need to take? What do we need to do to protect ourselves? What do we need to do to prevent something bad from happening? All of that's related to the culture, and that's one of the benefits of responsible ag. But again, let's hear from somebody that's been a part of responsible ag and how it affected the culture at his facility. Next slide, please. This is Trey Hill, and Trey Hill is the owner and manager of Harborview Farms. So it's a large farming operation in Maryland. And you'll see that his quote is, his whole culture changed. And as a farmer, he's glad that he joined Responsible Ag, and he'd encourage others to do it also, because as most of you know, safety culture at a farming operation is usually not maybe as good as it would be at a retail site. Not always the case, but frequently. So here's Trey basically saying that he recognizes how Responsible Ag has changed the culture among his workers and how they look at safety culture within his facility. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now the next one on my list of things for benefits would be peace of mind. Okay, and I know that this is one that's almost hard to measure. It's very difficult. Some people worry more about things that are going on at work, some don't, depending on the situations. But here's Trey Hill again, basically saying that he sleeps much better at night knowing that no matter what they're working on, people feel safe doing it and that safety is important to them. Well, again, that goes back to what we said earlier. He's established a safety culture at his facility so that he knows his employees are looking at things to make sure they don't do things that take too many risks or additional risks, okay? And now let's go with the next slide. Okay, so possible insurance rate adjustments, okay? Now, this could be different with different companies, with different situations, but let's face it, insurance companies are about risk, right? Managing risk. How much risk do they have to take to insure you? Well, here's, again, Trey Hill telling us that they recently had their insurance requoted and the rates were down because the insurance company recognizes they're part of Responsible Ag. As part of Responsible Ag, they have lower risk. They do a better job of managing risk. Therefore, there's less risk for the insurance company to take on. Therefore, their premiums have been lowered. So another possible benefit of being a part of Responsible Ag is your insurance rates could be adjusted based on the fact that you're helping to manage risk so the insurance company doesn't have to take on more risk, okay? All right, let's look at another benefit that was on my list, and that is improved community relations. This is another one of those things that it's difficult to quantify, it's difficult to measure, but certainly has huge amount of value. If you are part of a local community, and most retail sites are, this Responsible Ag is an opportunity for you to show the community where you live that you live and operate and doing the right things. It's an opportunity to show the community that you're taking that extra step. And you can make that known to them by doing things like putting the Responsible Ag logo up at your site once you become certified, putting the plaque up in your office once you become certified, and let them know that you're doing the right things, you're going above and beyond to try to protect the community, to be a good neighbor. And who knows, there's always that possibility of gaining business if your competitor is not part of it and you are, and there's a customer out there that's very, it's important to him to do the right things, and there's always that possibility of getting new business as a result. Okay, so the last one, here's a quote from another guy that's part of Responsible Ag, and his name's Billy Willard. He's the CEO of Willard Ag Service. Again, it's out on the East Coast. He says that as part of being community relations, that next slide, please. He's part of a major population center, and he knows that he's going to be continually scrutinized. If you know anything about the regulatory environment on the East Coast, it's a little bit more heavily scrutinized. He knows that. So as being a part of Responsible Ag, he's going to be more scrutinized in the community. Responsible Ag helps him to tell his story as to let people see what they're doing, and they're good at it, being responsible neighbors and making sure that they go above and beyond being safe. So another example of somebody who's been a part of Responsible Ag, again, showing others how it has benefited them. Okay, the last benefit I want to show you is, actually there's two more. Improved image with regulators. And this is something that basically what you're doing is you're establishing credibility. Next slide, please. When regulators come to your site, if they know you're a part of Responsible Ag, they see the credential and the decal, they see the plaque, they know instantly that you're trying to do the right thing. You're not trying to hide something like some sites that they go to do, and you're establishing credibility with regulators. Let's take a look at a quote from a high-level regulator on how he feels about Responsible Ag. Next slide, please. This guy's name's Jim Belkey. A few of you may know him. He's one of the big guys with RMP, Risk Management Plan. He was basically the architect and the guy spearheading that. Here's 3 quotes from him. And I think what he's saying here is true of any regulator, but he's a good representation of regulators saying they would much rather the industry take ownership, find safety issues and fix them before the regulators ever show up. He has seen the Responsible Ag checklist and he says it covers all the applicable regulations, but it's more than checking a box. Here he is again talking about culture. We had a couple of slides on culture. He, as a regulator, talks about culture of safety, not forgetting the big picture. And when he sees organizations willing to devote the amount of time and resources to training and safety improvement, he knows that people part of Responsible Ag are serious. And he's also been to the Ford West Training Center, and his next sentence is about that. He likes the full-scale equipment that provides training in both proper and improper design and compliance, because again, we've got things that are intentionally right, we've got things there that are intentionally wrong as an educational opportunity. Okay, the last thing I want to say in regard to benefits, and next slide, please. This is on a little bit of the economic impact, and some of this, I'll admit, is hard to measure. I've got some experience of managing a farm center for a number of years and managed a few other businesses as well in my career. So I understand that when management invests in something, they want to know, well, what's the return on that investment? Okay. Darren mentioned at the very beginning that there have been nearly 123,000 things that have been identified by Responsible Ag auditors, with nearly 91,000 of those corrected since the inception of Responsible Ag. Now, I want you to digest that number just a little bit. 123,000 with 93 of them corrected. It's impossible to know how many things we may have prevented by identifying and correcting those things. Things like a tire that was going to go bad on a DOT truck going down the road loaded with fertilizer, and an auditor caught it. The site didn't know it. Prevented a blowout, prevented a possible accident. Safety issues at a site, guarding, fall protection issues, things like environmental spills. I've been involved in environmental cleanups in my career that have been up to $2 million. When you talk about $150 investment for things that can save you thousands and thousands and thousands, I would question whether there's a better investment out there as far as a return on investment for $150 a year to get some trained set of eyes into your site and take a look. Okay? If you're an internal audit, you'll notice I've got here on this last bullet, $150 plus the cost of an audit. But if you have an internal auditor there on your payroll, you don't even have that. So again, huge return on investment. Now let's look at another quote. Next slide, please. And again, this is another quote from Billy Willard. And he's talking about being proactive, which is what Responsible Ag is all about. And he said he's learned being proactive is always the most cost effective than being reactive. When you become reactive in any situation, especially in a very populated area, remember he was, it can be very costly, and they'd like to reduce the risk up front before something happens. Do we have that slide, please? Okay, so I want to get to the summary now, a little bit about what Responsible Ag does. Now let's summarize about these benefits that we've looked at. We talked about regulators. regulators, one of the things that they do is they encourage the employer to create a proactive approach for finding and fixing hazards in the workplace. That's what they want you to do. And they would much rather you do that. A lot of people have the attitude, well, there's the Billy Willard quote, which I read to you about being proactive versus reactive. Let's go to the summary slide if we can. The regulators encourage employers to create a proactive workplace. And there are people out there that take the approach, well, if I don't know about it, then they can't really fine me for it or penalize me for it, which is not really necessarily true, because regulators, especially OSHA, looks at it from the standpoint that the employer knew or should have known. So, just saying I didn't know about it is not necessarily going to get you off the hook. And I would say this, I've also been involved in some fatalities in my career, and I don't wish that on anybody. It's one of the worst things you can experience in life, is to try to deal with a fatality and dealing with the things that go with that. Responsible ag is a step in the right direction to prevent something like that from happening. It's a step in making sure that all your employees, your workers, go home at the end of the day in the same way that they came to work, okay? In terms of EH&S and security and DOT, the greatest successes we ever have are the things that never happened, right? Think about that just a minute. The greatest successes we have in environmental, health, safety, security, and transportation are the things that never happened. Responsible ag is a great way to be able to identify potential issues that could keep somebody from going home at the end of the day in the same way they can. It's an effective program. You've got all the resources and tools that I went over today, plus some that I didn't go over that I just didn't have time to get to. And so I'm just a huge fan of responsible ag. I've been involved from pretty much the beginning because I believe in it. I don't know how you can put a price on trying to protect somebody, because we're competitors a lot out there in the workplace, where we try to gain market share and we try to beat heads over trying to get business. But in case of responsible ag and environmental health and safety, we really are not competitors, because nobody wants anybody else to get hurt at another business, another company. And so responsible ag is just a huge asset. And for very little investment, you can make your site a better place. And it's a win-win-win, right? It's a win for the community. It's a win with the regulator. It's a win for the site. It's a win for the worker and the public and the industry as a whole. So again, I'm a big proponent, based on things that I've seen in my career, based on the success that we've had within responsible ag. And if you're not a part of it, I would encourage you to do so. Okay, next slide is just the contact information. We've talked about responsibleag.org, so it's listed here on this next slide. I did not mention it, so I'll mention it now on this next slide. On key contacts, there is a help desk email address. So if you're part of Responsible Ag, let's say you're out and you have a question where you can't figure it out from the resources, the help desk is there too, another resource for you to be able to reach out to somebody and find the answers to whatever the issue is that you have at your site. Okay, I think that wraps up my part. So let's see what's next. Danielle, do we turn it over to you or Darren?
It's actually Richard. Hey, Brian, it's Richard Gupton with ARA. We have gotten a few questions, which I'll kick it off. If for attendees, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little arrow pointing towards the left. If you click on that arrow, there's a section in there for you to be able to submit questions if you haven't already. But we have already received a few questions, and one of them you did touch on in the slides. How often do they need an audit? I think you said every 3 years is what it takes when they're in the program. But one of them, and you partly touched on examples of the numbers of issues that have come up. And one of the questions is, with the responsible ag, with the auditors assessing facilities, what are the main items that come up at a given site, or what is responsible ag testing for at a given site is the first question.
What are we testing for, or what's the most common thing that we see?
I think both. It was kind of both combined question.
Okay. Well, as far as what they're looking at, there are 320 questions on the Responsible Ag checklist. And the auditor will go through the checklist and he will mark each question as a yes, a no, or a not applicable. So for example, in the anhydrous ammonia section, if you don't have ammonia, he's going to put a big X on every single question related to ammonia. It's not applicable, and so it won't be anything that you have to deal with. If you do have something that's applicable, he's going to mark it yes, no, or NA, depending on, let's say, for example, do you do emergency response? That's going to make a difference in regard to the training. It's going to make a difference to some of the equipment. And he'll go through all of that. Now, remember, your corrective action plan is only for those things that have been identified as a no, not satisfactory, not sufficient, action is needed. And so that will come up there. Now, as far as the most common one, we do have a list, and I don't have it in front of me. Every year, Asmark has with the part of their database that prints out the lists that are most common. Lockout, tagout, I know is very frequently on that list. And off the top of my head, that's probably as good as I'm going to be able to do.
At one point too, Richard and Brian, that it was intentional with the design of Responsible Ag. These are federal rules, and so it is a broad spectrum of an audit with many subject matters, both whether it's EPA topics, Department of Transportation, OSHA, but they are federal rules. And so I know a lot of times people are hesitant. I don't want to add additional regulatory responsibility on me. These questions are federal guidance, federal rules that apply to ag retail facilities.
Thank you. The next question is, how many farms or farmers are signed up for the program?
There are a few. I don't know the number off the top of my head. Does anybody else know?
I think
Website says 2. I'm looking at the dashboard and it says 2.
Yeah, I was going to say it's less than 10. There's a couple of farmers who also run ag retail stores too, and so there's probably somewhat less than 10, I believe, Richard.
Okay. The next question that's been submitted asks, how many years of related experience is needed to become an auditor?
That is listed on the website. When you go in there to apply, it's all listed, but it's 5 years. And there have been situations, depending on experience and background, where they've evaluated that particular candidate. And I know that there have been some in there with less than 5, but what's printed does say 5 years experience in EH&S.
This is a question I've got. How many of the ones that have signed up are auditors? I know y'all got both of you, Brian and Billy, have lots of years of experience in the industry. So what is the average years of experience for the current auditors under the Responsible Ag program? Would y'all take a guess at that and the total number that are auditors under the program?
I would say, if I had to guess, and that's all it would be somewhere in the 15 to 18 year as an average. We're getting a lot of newer people in. And of course, the people that we trained originally were the people that have been around for 30 plus years. But that would be my educated guess, and that's all it would be. It would be an educated guess.
Yeah, Richard, in my class, when Brian taught the class that I attended, I would think that just talking to the attendees that they would have had 20 plus years of experience in the course that I took.
So for this training program for our auditors, I mean, it's a value for these companies, particularly if they have newer people coming in EHS for those officials, right? This is kind of covers everything they need on the front end, and it's kind of critical training for them, for any of these companies, for newer people coming into the industry.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Richard. There's huge value in this training in addition to the ability to conduct a responsible ag audit. It's just like Billy said, a broad overview of regulatory requirements that they're going to have to deal with. And let's say it's an EH&S person that's going to have to write a lockout tagout program or a confined space entry program, and they don't exactly know where to start. Even something like that, this training would give you some value in regard to your overall EH&S compliance knowledge. Would you agree, Billy?
I do. I've worked in ag for a little over 30 years and have had a part of my career being in regulatory compliance for probably close to 35, almost 40 years. And when I took the class, I don't know if it was refresher or if it was actually I learned, but I can tell you it is tough to get through the. Brian's a tough teacher. He holds you accountable. I did learn a lot, and I think it can actually be a great resource, Richard, for people who are just beginning their career, all the way to people who were like myself, had worked 30 years in the industry.
And the next question.
Sorry, Richard, I know we're coming up against our hour. Do you have one more question to go?
Well, one more question. I mean, from your experience too, the regulatory landscape is constantly changing at the federal level. Obviously, the Trump administration was more reforms and peeling back some regulations for the industry, and it's kind of an unknown territory here with the Biden administration. So, is there any, from your perspective, is there any things that the participants should be looking out for on the horizon for new regulatory issues or challenges and things that the Responsible Ag program has been able to kind of discern from that?
I think PSM comes to my mind immediately. We all know what we went through with PSM. And for those, there may be some don't know what I'm talking about, process safety management, which retail has been exempt from since 1992 when it first became a regulation. And after West Texas, they tried to basically put it on retail sites without going through the proper channels to get a new regulation, and the courts threw it out. But I could see that one being one that they'll revisit. And if you know anything about PSM, it's not one of those simple regulations that you just, fill out a piece of paper and it's over. And it's very detailed. It's like risk management program, except it's even more involved than that. So that's the one that pops to my mind immediately, is that I think we could see popping its head up again.
Richard, I know we're running against our time. The thing I would encourage our audience is we really can't forecast the future, but I think it was commented by Billy Willard, it's better to be proactive than reactive. And Responsible Ag is a proactive tool. I think it gives you a great foundation. The regulatory community, we're a highly regulated industry. They may tweak some of the regulations, but I think Responsible Ag gives you a great base, and you're proactive as you move forward with compliance at your facilities.
Thank you, Billy. That's a great note for us to wrap up on. Brian did mention earlier some of the things that they see most often in the audits and mentioned lockout tagout. I'm looking at the list right now. Lockout tagout is number 1 and number 2 on the list. Other things like workplace hazards, eyewash, spare fuses for DOT round out the top 5, but lockout tagout is consistently at the top of the list. This webinar has been recorded. It'll be available from ARA probably tomorrow for those that want to access it. And I want to thank Brian Miller and Billy Perkle for your involvement in the webinar today, and for all of you for attending. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Darren.